Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for our conclusion here of the What's New SolidWorks 2019 webinar series. Today we're going to take a look at some of the collaboration tools and the manufacturing tools built in with SolidWorks 2019, the new improvements with specifically SolidWorks PDM, our data management software, the improvements with eDrawings, our free eViewer that SolidWorks and non-SolidWorks users alike can take advantage of, and then also the improvements with 2019 in SolidWorks CAM. So we'll start out with SolidWorks PDM. One of the great features in PDM as it manages the data beyond just file path references and workflow management is the search and reference functionality built into PDM. So one of the new things with SolidWorks PDM 2019 is in your search results and in your results from the contains and where used tabs, that will show you where a component is used in all the assemblies and drawings that it might be contained in, and vice versa, an assembly, what all components would be included in that assembly. In those lists, you've now got a full right mouse button menu where you've got the ability to change state of documents, check in, check out, get latest version of different documents, rather than having to navigate directly to the search result or to the reference itself. So that's one way that 2019 is just going to save us a few clicks and a little bit of time working with our files in PDM. Also, these two functions, the contains and where used tabs and the search results list, have actually seen some great performance improvements with 2019. They've just went in to make some changes to the way it communicates with the database in how often those communications have to be made while you're interacting in those lists. So now where you might have seen a little bit of lag as you interact in search result lists or contains where used lists in the past, really not going to see any of that lag now. There's less communications that have to happen between the client and the server. Another improvement with SolidWorks PDM 2019 is the ability to include default search values on your search cards. So typically what we see is often done is you want your users to be able to search for documents that they have checked out in the vault, is one good example for this implementation. In the past, you've had to go through and actually make a different search favorite for each of those users, and when a new user is added, a new search favorite would have to be set up for them. Now with default search values, you can actually specify default values like the user that's logged in. And it sounds like a small change, but that makes it a whole lot easier for including new users and maintaining your current users in the vault, being able to just put in a default value like the current user that's logged in as they view those search cards. So easier to set up and easier to maintain on the admin side of things. Also, a big improvement, we're going to see this in eDrawings as well, is now the eDrawings preview built into the PDM Windows Explorer Vault view now supports configurations, so you can actually jump between different configurations of a SolidWorks file in the preview window without having to open SolidWorks or open eDrawings, as well as sheets in drawings to be able to move between the different sheets and not only see just that one active sheet like we've had in the past with the preview pane. This is one of the things that when new customers are working with SolidWorks PDM, this really improves the workflow. How often does somebody come up to your desk and ask to see a part or an assembly or a drawing, and you have to go through and find it and open it and let that load, and they just want to see one little thing? That a lot of times these preview windows in Windows Explorer can satisfy what the need is in the moment at those times. Now, being able to switch between drawing sheets and part configurations, assembly configurations in that preview window just gives you a lot more functionality, again, without having to open up and load up the individual software. Another improvement in the SolidWorks PDM Windows Explorer Vault View interface is now Metadata is going to fully support the different cut lists for different configurations in a part. So if you have cut list properties, like here we've got an example of BOM quantity, or if you have different configurations with different materials or other cut list properties, those can actually be viewed from within the data card pane. And also, since we're able to pull that metadata into PDM now, we can utilize that metadata not only in the data card pane, but also in any searches or queries that we run on the database. Those are now, the configuration cut list properties are now incorporated into the metadata that the Vault is able to keep up with. One more thing we got in the Windows Explorer user interface for the PDM Vault view is the ability to, when we save a new sheet on a drawing and check that into the Vault, now we can actually set up to where it will pull default values from the custom properties for those additional sheets. In the past, we've had that capability for the first sheet, and that it would pull those default values in from the custom properties. But on secondary and further sheets, those had to be copied over manually. Now, just a little bit more automation where we would expect it, being able to add sheets to a drawing, and those data cards become automatically populated with our custom property values. And the last couple things I want to look at on the user interface side of SolidWorks PDM are the integration for add-ins for both SolidWorks Inspection and SolidWorks Composer. So Inspection is our first article inspection quality control software, and Composer is our technical documentation software. Both of these have standalone applications that run alongside the SolidWorks user interface, external to it. And now with 2019, we see that SolidWorks PDM add-in giving you the ribbon of controls where you can actually check out, interact with files in the Vault, browse directly to them, or change their state from within the program user interface, rather than having to close the file out, go find it in the Vault, and navigate with it there, activate with it there. So just kind of rounding out our multi-product suite with Inspection and Composer this year, having that PDM add-in that we're used to seeing with Microsoft Office and with SolidWorks CAD. A few other things more on the administrative side, I guess, with SolidWorks PDM for 2019 is the automations tools are great with the workflow and being able to automatically generate PDFs, DXFs, automatically send out notifications as a product goes through a workflow. But now they've added one more little capability in those automatic transitions and tasks that are run, is being able to run an automatic flat pattern of a part to be able to export a DFX or DWG of the actual flattened state of the part as a file is moved through the workflow. So oftentimes this will be when a file gets released to get a major revision incremented on it. We'll see not only a PDF generated, but also now automatic DXFs for flat patterns that you can be able to send out to get those burned automatically generated. Again, just a couple clicks, little bit of work that nobody has to remember to do. It just gets done automatically as the file moves through the workflow. Another workflow improvement with 2019 is the option for conditional notifications. Oftentimes, we like notifications to go through and as a file is moved through the workflow in the Vault, maybe when it's submitted for approval or released into a final state. But we don't necessarily have to have notifications all the time. So with conditional notifications, you can actually build in good if-then type logic to choose which files actually cause a notification for which users. Maybe you've got certain folders in your Vault that are more important than the others, that only those files in those folders need notifications as they're moved through the workflow. So now you can set up some options like that with your notifications. Also, another improvement with as files move through the workflow is the ability to require comments just for only certain states or transitions, rather than requiring comments globally across the board. Comments is one of those things that administrators and auditors need those comments and the history there to exist as the file moves through the different versions and revisions during its life cycle. But at the same time, having to put in the comments when there's very little changes made may not be the red tape that you want for your engineers. And so what you can do now is actually go in and specifically point out where those comments are required, rather than having to require them for every transition and every check-in as the file progresses. And the last thing, kind of on the administration side of SolidWorks PDM, is the new support for mixed logins. So now with 2019, your Active Directory, your Microsoft Active Directory, can be utilized alongside your standard SolidWorks PDM users. In the past, you've had to either commit to only using SolidWorks PDM users or only using your Microsoft Active Directory. But now being able to use those alongside each other gives admins the capability for not only adding members, adding employees who might not be in the Active Directory, but also setting up secondary logins in PDM for people that maybe have two different roles. Somebody that might sometimes serve as an admin could be given an admin user, PDM user, and then they would have their normal Active Directory user that they use on a day-to-day basis where they have the standard engineer or viewer capabilities. So all these improvements, SolidWorks 2019, really just give you the tools that you need to really manage your design ecosystem. One of the things we brag about our data management system, PDM, is companies with 1 employee to 100 employees to 1,000 employees. You can shape PDM to fit your needs. It can be as small and as simple or as big and as complex as you want it to be. And so what we're doing is shaping the software to match your design ecosystem rather than shaping what you do on a day-to-day basis around the software. And next we'll take a look at our other collaboration tool I want to highlight today is SolidWorks eDrawings. This year with 2019 eDrawings, we've got some great improvements that kind of parallel, a few of them parallel the improvements we've seen over the last few months as Jared and Ben have walked us through the improvements with parts and assemblies and other tools within inside the SolidWorks CAD environment. Some of them, like the improved performance for large assemblies, parallel directly with what we've been seeing with SolidWorks 2019 included in eDrawings here. But we're going to go into the eDrawings software and take a look specifically at some of these improvements that we've got for this year. So here in the eDrawings interface, as I go to open up a file to pull up in eDrawings, I've got this cylinder assembly that I want to take a look at here. But if we look at the available file types for 2019, we'll see that Parasolids, Solid Edge files, ACES files, and JT files, as well as NX Unigraphics files, have been added for 2019 as files that you can open in eDrawings. This is really going to make it to where eDrawings isn't just for SolidWorks, that anybody can download a free version of eDrawings and open up everything from an Inventor file to a Pro E file, your Parasolids and your step files, as well as your SolidWorks and eDrawings files that have been saved out there. So a few 4 or 5 new file types have been added in this year for us, capabilities with eDrawings, really making it a good general eViewer for all the different file types that you might come across. Now with eDrawings 2019, we've got the capability to access different configurations of native SolidWorks files. Previously, only the active configuration of a SolidWorks file would be visible in eDrawings when you open the file directly. And to get configurations, the files actually had to be saved out into an eDrawing specific format. Now, I know firsthand that we've worked with customers who this was a major hurdle for them, for people on the shop floor to be able to directly open up SolidWorks assemblies and parts drawings in eDrawings and work with those files, take measurements on the shop floor and interact with those files. Adding in that extra step to create a eDrawings assembly or an eDrawings part that would always need to be exported and updated. While we can add tasks like that into SolidWorks PDM, into our workflows, and even into the check-in process, having to have that extra file that needs to be maintained is definitely a hurdle for that option. So now with eDrawings 2019, being able to open a SolidWorks part or assembly, and as long as the correct options are set up on your system properties in SolidWorks, all those configurations will be visible. This isn't just for within a company that uses SolidWorks in the shop floor. This is the free eDrawings viewer that your customers, your clients, can actually download and install on their machines to be able to get nice previews as you send them parts to take a look at. Get direct feedback on what you're working with there. Now, I don't have a large assembly opened right here necessarily, but one of the improvements that y'all seen, I kind of mentioned it, y'all seen it with SolidWorks assemblies in 2019, is the improvement for working and rotating large assemblies. And previously, when you rotated a large assembly in SolidWorks or in eDrawings, you would see some simplifications on the geometry happen, and that was to really reduce the lag as the files are rotated and manipulated. Now, as you zoom in and out, as you rotate files, including large assemblies, larger than this one, I don't have a direct example on that, you're going to see practically no delay and not even a need for simplifying the geometry as you work with those. So they've really redone the graphics pipeline for both SolidWorks and eDrawings in 2019. Great performance improvements, just response time and reducing that delay as you work with those and move and rotate and zoom on large assemblies. Also in the eDrawings interface here, we've added a new visibility option for ambient occlusion. You may have seen this in your SolidWorks environment. That just adds in a little bit more extra shading for a realistic look. And so they've added that in eDrawings, both in the standalone program that we're going to look at here, as well as one of the next things I want to take a look at is the new HTML file that you can save out. So somebody doesn't even have to install eDrawings to be able to view your files. So ambient occlusion there, but before we move on into the HTML version, last thing I want to take a look at is the measure tool. So previously, prior to 2018, in order to be able to measure distances in an eDrawings file, you had to have eDrawings Professional and also a file that was unlocked for measurement, of course. Now with 2019, all of the features that were related to eDrawings Professional 2018 and earlier have been migrated into the standard free eDrawings that can be downloaded online. So now one of the things included in that, most importantly, is the measure tool can be used in the free version of eDrawings. So you can lock that down, of course, when you're saving the files out. But now somebody with the free version of eDrawings, you can send them files and they can take measurements to make sure that everything's matching up as they're wanting their design to look like. So that's a big opportunity for 2019. People that have been restricted by needing that measurement functionality, but that requiring eDrawings Professional, now that's been unlocked for all the versions, including the free versions of eDrawings. And last thing we'll look at in eDrawings is, like I mentioned, the HTML format. We go to Save As. There's a new web HTML file that you can choose to save a file out as, and I've already saved out this cylinder assembly. I'm going to open this HTML document here, and you see it's opening in Microsoft Edge. They'll be able to, if you send this file to somebody, it's just a single HTML file, they'll be able to open up that file in their web browser without having to install any software or plugins. They've got configuration support, a list of all the components that will actually cross-highlight as you select components from the component list. It supports an eDrawings exploded view, as well as being able to work through section views of the file to see what the internal components look like. The HTML viewer also allows for playing animations that are created into the file, animating between the views. It has the ambient occlusion that we saw in the eDrawings standalone, as well as your front, top, right, isometric standard views, and the different display styles you might want for visualization purposes. Hidden lines visible, removed, wireframe, shaded with or without edges. So this new HTML file format can be saved out, and again, the person on the other end receiving the file doesn't actually have to install eDrawings. You can send them an HTML document of a part, assembly, or drawing that they can open, take a look at, be able to rotate and interact with without having to go through any process of installation. A lot of times we're sharing these files, either inside the company or external to the company, with people who aren't CAD users, aren't engineers, but then being able to open and interact with a 3D file really takes a lot of the communication issues out of that interchange. And so being able to do new file types, new options for configurations and visibility modes, the free measurement tool, and that new HTML format, eDrawings really is like the main go-to for viewing CAD files, no matter if they're from SolidWorks, third-party CAD, or neutral file formats like Parasolid or step files. And the last thing we'll take a look at is SolidWorks CAM 2019. We got a few improvements we want to take a look at there, and if you haven't seen SolidWorks CAM, it is a newer product that is powered by CamWorks. It's 2.5 axis milling, and the CAM Pro actually includes turning as well. And so 2.5 axis CAM, being able to generate CNC code within the SolidWorks interface, and this is included with every seat of SolidWorks, Standard, Pro, or Premium. Every seat of SolidWorks that's on subscription is able to use tools like SolidWorks CAM for 2.5 axis machining. So the first thing we want to take a look at is the options that we have for modifying and customizing our CNC programs. So we've got set up part here modeled on the vise assembly. Of course, all that gets incorporated into the CNC code. You can have it avoid fixturing and work around the tooling that's there. We'll switch over into a side view. Well, let me take a look at first where the interface is. So, of course, you've got typical controls like any SolidWorks add-in built in the interface there on the CAM tab. But SolidWorks CAM adds 3 new trees: the CamWorks feature tree. Similar to SolidWorks where we have typical features, the CamWorks feature tree is where the geometry lives. The facing geometry, circular pocket, open pockets, and then the different groups of holes. The next tree over is the operation tree, where we see how each of those features is created. Sometimes for like these open pockets, where it's cutting the outside profiles, we've got roughing and contouring operations. So typically your operation tree may even have several operations for many of the features. And then the last tab is the tool tree, where you can actually drag and drop these operations between different tools to change which tools would be used from your tool crib. And all this is fully customizable, and you build a database around it. Your database controls not only which tools get used, but things like the feeds and speeds, the patterns that are used, the different operations that are used for certain features. You might, when you create pockets of one size, you might want to rough it out, come back with a smaller tool and rough it out again, and then come back in with the contour milling and edge breaking operations. You set up strategies in your database that the software learns those best practices that you use in your shop. So what we often tell people, and we hear this from people that are switching over into CamWorks, we often hear, well, typically it only takes a couple hours to generate the code because it's the same kind of stuff we do every time. Well, those hours or days can actually turn into just minutes of machining, because we teach the software what those best practices are and allow it to automatically apply those to the tools. So just like when we're working with SolidWorks parts and assemblies, we've got configuration options within SolidWorks CAM. So we'll switch to a different SolidWorks CAM configuration that corresponds with a SolidWorks assembly configuration. The part's been flipped over, and we'll take a look at many of the operations that have been included on this side of the part in this setup. So the operation we want to take a look at right now, though, is this contour mill operation around the outside of the part. One of the improvements with 2019 is the ability to modify the non-cutting portion of the tool. Often as you're working the way down the part, the upper portions of the tool need to have more clearance from the higher portions that you've already passed and have already milled. You don't want to ruin those faces that have already been cut. So now there's actually a non-cutting portion. We can choose not only between straight type tools, but also tapered or necked tools. So I'm going to put in a little 4mm diameter section necked out on this tool, so that as we cut the lower portion of the part, our simulation will actually reflect the type of tool we're using as we try to avoid marring those faces after they've been machined. We also have control over tool holder. Now, not necessarily new with 2019, but the shape of the tool and the size of the tool holder get incorporated into the simulations to warn us if there's any gouges on the part. Those would actually be visible, and you can run these simulations of the tool paths and the part being cut digitally before you get out and wreck any metal. Another improvement with 2019, in addition to that taper and necking option, on our feeds and speeds tab, we actually have the ability now to add slowdowns for sharp corners. We specify how sharp the corner is that we want to slow down, the feed rate that we want to go at through the corners, and then how much of the corner we want to go at that feed rate. So right now that's set for just over 1 millimeter. We'll be slowed down to 80% of the feed rate. And then of course we can treat corner radii with that treatment as well. So as we make a change like this to our toolpath, we can add the modifications to the tool back into the database. The toolpaths will update automatically, and all this being built into the SolidWorks interface means that if I need to go back into my SolidWorks tree, change anything on the part, I can come back in here, and SolidWorks CAM is going to update the features and the operations, the toolpaths, based on the changes that are made to the geometry. So we've got those changes made there. We'll just run a quick simulation through the part. If you haven't seen SolidWorks CAM in action before, this is one of the great options that we've got to be able to run a simulation to make sure our toolpaths look correct. We went through the facing operation. Now the larger tools roughing out the sides. SolidWorks CAM Pro for these kind of roughing operations actually does support high-speed machining with volume mill. So that's included in SolidWorks CAM Pro. SolidWorks CAM Standard is the version that is included with every seat of SolidWorks, and then CAM Pro is that additional little upgrade you can do to include things like volume mill, turning, or assembly machining. So I'm going to pause it here. This is the tool, and we can just slow it down and let it roll through a little bit. This is the tool there where we went ahead and added that tapered portion of the shank in. And you'll see as the tool works its way down the part, that shank portion that's tapered in is going to accurately show what we would expect in the machining environment. So we can tell there if it looks like we got enough of the tool necked, or if we need to switch to a different piece of tooling there. And I'll just speed it up and let this one finish out. So here you can actually do a little comparison mode. So you can see at the end of the setup, maybe if there was any tight corners that you need to go to a smaller tool with, material that's remaining there. If you miss any fillets or chamfers along the edges that need to be added in. If any of the major features are missed, as well as if there's any collisions between the holder, between the tool when it's rapiding with the part. And those would be red flags for us, again, before we start breaking tools or scrapping any metal. Doing a digital simulation like this is just as valuable as FEA simulation before putting a product out on the market. Then I've got another part I want to take a look at here, another little setup. We're going to finish the rest of this part on a rotary machine, take a look at some of the options for setting up machines and strategies with the technology database in 2019. Then we'll also take a look at direct controls that we have over one is holding conditions, but also then taking features and being able to actually shift and move features within the geometry. Again, without having to actually change the SolidWorks geometry. So we've got our rotary, 4-axis rotary machine set up here with the part fixtured up on it. And we'll take a step into the technology database, kind of a peek behind the curtain of what's going on behind the scenes. SolidWorks CAM will use this database, and you'll set up your different machines that will correspond to the post-processors that are used. And now the new thing in 2019 is the default feature strategies can be assigned individually for each machine. So we might have one set of strategies which control which operations are used for features for one machine, and for our 4-axis rotary table we have set up right here, we can actually come in and modify the defaults for that machine. Again, being able to change the defaults, change the database, teaching the software what our best practices are, means that we're never at a loss. No matter who's running the software and generating the code, you can be sure it's always going to be done to your specifications, and the foundation is all built into the software for us. All right, a couple other changes I want to make using some of the new 2019 tools. On the little left side of this feature here, we've got a small hole that actually goes all the way into a curved face on the inside. One of the caveats with small holes like this is that we want to make sure that the tool engages early enough and pushes through far enough to get a good clean cut on that entire hole. So we'll find the hole here in the feature tree. This is hole number 2. You can see the highlight here of the geometry it's detecting, those red lines. And with 2019, we can actually go in, hole 2 it originates here in this third mill part setup. We can actually change the end conditions of the hole to set up, instead of using strictly the geometry, we can add blind end conditions, a lot like a boss extrude or cut extrude, to tell it that we want to start the hole maybe 3 millimeters early, and we want to push through an extra 2 millimeters, controlling the actual size of the feature that SolidWorks CAM is going to detect and work toward. So that's being able to control hole end conditions in SolidWorks 2019 for SolidWorks CAM. But another tool we've got to help us machine toward mean tolerances is the move command for features now. So we take this eyebrow pocket here on the top of the part. We might determine for one reason or another that we want to shift that feature over in one direction or the next. Instead of having to go back into the part model and make those changes, we may just want those changes made at the SolidWorks CAM level. Maybe the machinist is not the designer, and the machinist knows that this feature needs to be shifted. There's now a new move feature operation that will allow us to move a feature in the X, Y, or Z direction relative to the setup. So we can make a small shift to the geometry, maybe to account for the shape of the tool or account for machining to those mean tolerances that we need to achieve, without having to actually go in and either use a workaround like editing the CNC text code directly or editing the actual design, the part itself. So those new options with SolidWorks CAM in 2019 give us great capabilities to, one, automate as much of the CAM machining process that we can, but two, to have as much complex and in-depth comprehensive control that we need as we create each toolpath, whether it be on a complex rotary or mill turn machine, or just working with 2D cutouts from DXFs. So that gives us a greater flexibility working with many machines, eliminating the time where we actually have to go in and make those fine-tuning adjustments. We can have those built into the database or have some good, elegant controls over features and holes rather than having to find workarounds to facilitate what we need to achieve. So with that, this wraps up our look at SolidWorks 2019 What's New. So I want to thank y'all for joining us today, and y'all have a great day.